Okay, so while we still give people a chance to wait, maybe we will just go through our agenda for today. So today we're going to be talking about front end. We will talk about client part, and we will have to start with some boring theory maybe that is important for you to better understand Creatio architecture so that you also know the capabilities of what you can modify, but also limitations of what you can technically modify, but maybe shouldn't attempt to. So we will talk about client part, what an IMD concept is, employment of required JS framework and its physical implementation, MVVM patterns, structure of Creatio client modules. And then we will make our first example in JavaScript. We will have we will have more on Monday. This one is going to be a little bit more simple as an opening point for our JavaScript practicing, more of a like a hello world type of item. Then we will be talking about business rules, not too deep because again, this is more of a no-code item, but we will also talk about some limitations and some new features that are available. So even if you are not new to Creatio, you might have overlooked some new features that were expected for a while. But more importantly, we will use business rules in order to cover something that is quite frequently becomes a problem, that is working with unique data items that cover role memberships. And we will talk a little bit about how users and roles are structured and operate in Creatio, how to migrate them, when to migrate them, and when not to overuse this. So we will do the transfer, and then we will have a very tiny item on the inputs. This is also more of a no-code item, but also very frequently we face a misunderstanding with this. So this is why it's necessary to cover that as well. So Creatio frontend. Creatio is a complex JavaScript application with many layers. And if I go to, we can use our own page for that. I can open a page and I can use inspect mode to actually see what is behind scenes. So as I selected, I think I clicked on name, I see the HTML tags and a lot of HTML tags that are putting together this pages view. None of this was handwritten, and we will not be making any manual modifications to HTML structure of our page or to CSS. All this was automatically generated by some low-level JavaScript. So we in Creatio, when we work with our pages and modifying this, so obviously there are much more. I'm just going through the high level tags, but there is much more HTML text here. But all of this was generated by Creatio core JavaScript logic. In Creatio, we only modify the high-level definition of a page. And then what happens is Creatio will load necessary module. Creatio has, now I'm switching from elements to sources, and Creatio has few thousand front-end modules that together are responsible for the page operation, both its logic and its layout. And if I go to the sources, I will see such modules. There are many such modules. And you don't really need to investigate them outside of the scope of some of the modules that have maybe some features, maybe we will cover that today, that might be useful to you. So now I'm in shell modules, which is everything but my yacht page. So how these items on my left-hand side, my top items with these controls, how they operate. And this is part of the core. But also I have the configuration items, and I will also see many configuration um, here packs, and most of them will include JavaScript, CSS, as you can see, files that are not meant for modification. You technically can do this. So you can find the respective, because it's part of configuration, and we discussed that configuration versus core is something that is open for modification, but it is open for modification outside of the scope of the Creatio core, both for you and Creatio developers. So, in fact, the only proper way to operate with front end of Creatio is only to work with the highest level of definition of the page. So when a user is working with a particular, writes a request here, and our browser processes JavaScript to show you something, what happens is a selection of modules is loaded, and then the core JavaScript will generate the true HTML, CSS in order to show you proper page. So how this is organized? We will look into so-called AMD concept, which stands for asynchronous module definition. The idea is this. If you have a complex JavaScript application that has a lot of items to be processed, then instead of trying to create a sequence of load, so obviously you need to organize all of your code somehow, which is split into modules. And instead of trying to load a sequence of modules, which would be very long time, we are using an approach that will split your functionality properly into different modules and load them asynchronously, simultaneously. So this is a theoretical concept that has a physical implementation. And Creatio developers decided to use Require.js framework in order to apply this concept for Creatio application. Require.js frameworks essentially puts together the how out of all available sources. You only need necessary. So something that I mentioned, that there are a few thousand of modules in Creatio, but a particular page usually maybe needs few hundred of modules at most. So, and this is the job in this is applied within the Require.js module, and we can now check how our page is structured. So if we go to, I have my page opened. I will use this tiny cogwheel to open it in design time again. And so we're opening Freedom UI Designer, our design time of a page. A completely no-code tool, so it was designed for no-code creators, and our simple drag and drop operations, what they do, they are the highest possible definition, then translated into JavaScript code that we will see next. So I'm opening my source code. And I see JavaScript task here, which is also a very high level definition of how this page works. It has only less than 600 lines, so obviously we should not expect this page operational based on this small piece of code. But this is what we're using to change the logic and the behavior of our Creatio application. And this page and this high-level definition, so the structure of it, it comes from React. Define a module, and then we return a collection of JavaScript objects. And there are different layers, which we will discuss in a moment, and also some complementary items that can offer us extra logic to it. But before we proceed any further, it is also very important to understand that this is still metadata. So if you open this file, it doesn't mean that you can simply add create a new JavaScript object within some places of this code. This structure is defined by MVVM patterns, but also these items that you see that look like comments, they're actually tags. And if you make any modification here, the page will simply not work because what is processed, this is not a separate executable JavaScript file. Instead, this is loaded by a manager that puts together the logic. For example, this highest level definition of a page is still based on other high level definition of its parent page. When we created this yacht form page, we did so through creating a section, but essentially the same would happen if I would go to Application Hub, and I could have done this. Instead, we could go to Yacht, Application, and under the Pages tab, hit New Page, and we would select some template for a new page. The default page that is used is this tabbed page with progress bar. I wonder why it's called with progress bar, but this is no, it's not this one. I'm sorry to confuse you. Why progress bar is added here, I wonder. Just the left area. Yeah, so without progress bar. So back here, tabbed page with left area is actually the template of a new page that system automatically applied to our yacht. So we have a parent page to our yacht, which we modified, and this is why in these blocks you see the suffix diff, because it only defines the difference comparing to parent. And here I see my client module name, and this is my client module schema name. And they should match. Schema puts together the JavaScript definition, but also some more items such as connection to blob items, special schema parameters, and localizable strings that we will work with later on when we're using them. And if I open this edit item for my schema, I will see that my yacht has a parent, which is that tabbed page with left area, which if I open here, will navigate me to the parent that I have just shown, which is also high-level definition, but it is a little bit more specific into what is applied. So we see much more JavaScript text in the view because this is what primarily inherited. So what is the view and how it's different from other items? Just a moment. And by the way, so obviously we can open our designer with this tiny cogwheel. We can go to Application Hub, open our application pages tab, and open the same from here. And finally, if we go to configuration, and we will find client, and we will filter by client modules, we can either click on the link like so. This will by default open Freedom UI Designer, or at the end we can click three dots and select Open Source Code, which will navigate to the same space that I have just demonstrated. Sometimes if you will wander around and explore some of the items, not every item will open for you in Freedom UI Designer. Some will only after you install applications from Marketplace. That is because what that means is that they only had classic UI page before installing Marketplace application. So if I would open the old contact, I would also see the same, the source code immediately. If I open my yacht, because it's now Freedom UI page, I first see the Freedom UI design time. This is just not to confuse you why sometimes you open client module and see the source code. But now back to our topic. So this is our definition of our yacht form page. We know now that it only defines the differences comparing to the parent. Those differences are primarily in view, and we see a pattern here that with the division view, view model, model. So what this stands for is MVVM, model, view, view model. It's an architecture design that splits your page code, interface code, into three layers. So instead of writing a code where everything is connecting to everything, you are building a structured code with, if you follow this pattern, where you split your interface logic into three separate layers. The view is your controls. So where it is, for example, if I open a page, we have some definitions about this name field. So where is its position within the container? What it is, how is it titled? If there are some featuring styles which are applied. So all these are view. They essentially define how user perceives data. Model is the data itself, but this is not the database data. This is not the application layer data. This is data that is stored in the client. So there is a hidden space on the client that after the data is loaded, will cache that data that user will be interact with. So this is the afterload. This is the client data model. We have business logic and data here. In Creatio, we do not make modifications with this using JavaScript IDE. Now, in order to connect our view and model, we have an extra layer in between, view model, which knows a lot about view, the representation of the page, and has the connection to model, the client the data that is now stored in client and puts this logic together. So in Creatio, if we need to make some modifications, we either apply them to view to modify our controls or to view model, rarely or never to model. Also, we have some unique spaces in order to add some extra logic to what is applied. So we have handlers, and we will build one today, and we will build more later, which means that we will be able to react to handle events on the client side. We have converters where it's necessary to create, well, it's pretty self-explanatory to make conversions, and validators. We will also build a validator which can be universally applied to a page, but also you can define other modules, maybe with more complex or collection of validators, and you can load them within definition of a module. So the structure is this: we're defining a module. We have this schema dependencies, and we could this is a more complex example. This would be more complex example, but we could create other client modules that will be loaded prior to loading of this module because it's relying on it. And if we have some logic in those modules, then they can be employed by this module. They be called for this module. So again, the view, which is just the layout, view model, which is how we connect our view with our model, which is our data source on the client. So data is loaded, it's stored now, and we will start with model because it doesn't have much to show us, even though it does have maybe what may appear to have a weird structure because we have page data source, but then again, we have the structure and we see that we are actually operating with an array of sources. Since maybe a year back, Creatio will allow you to add multiple data sources to the same page. We have Yacht as a primary data source, and we can have even more data sources. I will use something existing. I'm not going to save this change, but we can have many more data source, not many more. At at worst you might need few. So now a single page can operate with Yacht data, and these are the columns of Yacht, but also with data from a different object, and these are the columns of a contact. So, for example, if I drag and drop address here, I will be able not only to read from simultaneously a contact and a Yacht, but also to write from the same page. This is more of an edge case. It is mostly necessary for very complex enterprise level solutions. So we don't use that often, but it is this flexibilities that offers extra complexity to the structure of our model layer. So here we simply declare, and we don't make modifications to this. We simply declare, we use Freedom UI Designer to create the connection, but this is a declaration for our data sources, and Creatio Core will configure how they are stored, when they're called, etc. Then we have our view. Also the high definition that is talking about how our page is laid out and structured. So let's start with something more simple, probably. Well, you've worked with these items during no code, but for example, we have an operation. So this is a diff. We difference comparing to parent. And here, comparing to this parent, we have an operation, for example, to insert an item which is has, by the way, a localized label. So here we have this localizable strings. This is to support multi-language, and this is why level is actually relying on one of those localizable strings. And we have some very high-level configurations. How many columns it has, how many rows it has, what is the name of the parent of this element, side area profile container. So very, very high level definition for the controller that will store the name. And if we go now to view model, in here, which is also an array of page attributes that connect our views to our model. And so here we see this name, and we see the path to page data source, and we see the attribute name. So when we will be building some JavaScript examples, it is the name of page attribute versus model attribute, data model attribute, or otherwise in more common Creatio language, object column. Page attribute what dynamically processes data. So it is against page attributes that we can capture events like a field on page was edited. And you will see these weird extensions, which are generic. They don't look pretty, but they are necessary. The problem is that page attributes, they have to be unique. And the problem is that name is, I think, is okay for primary page data source. But if your page is connected not to one object, like most of the pages will be in your practice, but to multiple objects, then it brings this complexity where potentially, if a single client module, like our yacht, is relying on multiple data sources, on multiple objects, then technically, potentially we can have different objects that have columns with the same name. So some time ago, page attribute would simply copy the name of the page element. Now it's no longer operational. So Creatio makes them unique. So this is why our lengths of our yacht has this addition. And it is very important to understand that when we are creating our own JavaScript logic, this is what we are primarily relying on. And just to summarize a little. So what a module is. A module is a defined piece of JavaScript that is going to be applied when you are loading a specific space. This space is only defining the differences when it's doing so, differences comparing to parent. When it's being loaded, it only defines a high-level logic, and it is the lower level logic that will read into this metadata, apply these configurations properly to core, and then core will generate all the necessary HTML text for your page to properly appear to your end user the way you designed it. And so what it means when we're looking to this code together with parent, what they represent together, just a moment. Okay. And so what they represent together, maybe not. If we try to see our code as a pyramid, so together they represent this teeny tiny top of all the client-side logic. And everything else, sorry, I'm having some issues with controls. Again, let's put this together. And we are tip of the iceberg. These all high-level definitions. And everything else is being organized by core. The technology behind all this is React.js to put together dependencies, load order, and load only necessary collection of sources to process it to HTML text. If we look into this, we will see a lot of NGs because this is processed by Angular framework. You can technically dive deeper than working with higher definition, but it is a complex operation. For example, you could potentially, and there is an article that will explain how to do this, you can potentially add your own component. So not restrict yourself to the components that were developed by Creatio developers, but add your own and then reuse it on different pages. But that will require a lot of expertise with Angular and, well, in general, a lot of expertise with front-end development. And this is also about cost of the maintenance and development. So this only happens very, very rarely. Usually we want to build our application as fast as possible. And this is, again, why we are restricting ourselves to no code whenever possible. But now we will try to add some coding. Today, it's not going to be very useful, but just more of a representation how to do this in the first place. Before we proceed, though, a notion of being careful, which is very important because this happens all the time. If you build a habit of going to design time through this tiny cogwheel, and then from here to source code, so please understand that these are two different designers for the same item. This opens the child, loads the child, loads the parent, so it's not just this text, but parent also, transforms that into this layout that we can use for drag and dropping tool. But if I make some modifications in the source code, I save those modifications, and then I go back here, which in this session doesn't know of the modification that I just made, and I hit this save button, what I will do, I will essentially overwrite this version of the page with this version of the page. So basically, I will undo all my modifications here. So maybe a safer way to avoid this, and it will require some discipline, and you will very frequently have a lot of Creatio tab for the same instance opened, and this can happen very frequently. But maybe the better approach would be to go to advanced settings and open source code directly. So we go to our Yacht form page, and we will open this source code. Then we will see this. But now I need actually both designers, because first I'm going to use no-code tools simply to create a placeholder. I want to create a button that will do something. We will see something in console, we will see a pop-up. So I want to build a button that will do something. I can technically, if I uh, open some other pages, and I can copy paste in order to add the control to the view layer and then add my handler. But a much easier and faster way to do this is to apply both no code designer and our designer for JavaScript text. So I'm opening this in Freedom UI Designer first, and I will create a placeholder for my new button. Components, button. I'll place it here, and I'll call this button test. It will have an icon, just some icon. And for action, for that placeholder, I need to add some action that is not very reliant. So cancel changes is probably the simplest button, which dismisses everything. At this stage, it does the exact same thing as this cancel button does. So we open, we cancel, essentially we close this page. I only needed to be, oh, sorry. And of course, the element code. I only need this to find my button in the code. Okay, so I saved this. I'm closing this. And now I'm opening now this module with the button, but I'm opening its source code instead. And I want to find my button first. So Control F, let's find our button. And we can memorize line 63 is where we defining insertion of this button. And what this button does is in here, the request, and we see the CRT cancel record change request. CRT is a new norm, new principle in Creatio development team. So this is a prefix that identifies this was created by Creatio. This is a naming convention. You don't necessarily have to stick to it, but usually we do. So this tells me this is by Creatio, and this is a unique request when cancel record change request. So I will have to change this, what the request is. Now, I will go to my handlers, and in order to define handlers, I will insert it here. So again, a reminder, this is not just a comment, this is a tag. If I make any modifications here, my page will not be able to load handlers, will probably not even be able to load in the first place because of the manager not being to recognize this as a fully operational module to load it. So in our day 5, sorry, day 5 snippets, and there is a ready to go example. So we will carefully copy this and insert it here. So obviously some experience with coding is necessary to properly insert such snippets. If you miss any characters here, add some special characters, obviously this will break code. So be very, very careful with these examples, please. We will have more of them, more and more as we will progress. So how the handler is structured. So first, with this handler, we are reacting to a specific request. The request is USR, meaning that user. So this is not, again, this prefix is us following tradition to identify who is responsible for this item. So now on the button layer, I need to explicitly say that that button is actually initiating this. And in Creatio, this I tooltip will offer me some hotkeys. One of them is Alt G. To jump to a specified line. So I jumped here and I need to now replace this event with my event, user push button request. Now back to my handler and what it does. So handler is an asynchronous function that takes in two arguments. First is the request, and second, and this is important, the next handler in the chain of handlers. We will have more handlers. Some will be more practical than this one. So if we have more than one handler, in order to run the next one in chain, we need to return that next handler if it exists, and then we will handle that next one based on the request. So this is a standard structure that you will always have to follow if you want all the handlers to operate. Now we will do some simple items. First one is we'll write into console log that button works. Second, we'll use an existing and still supported TerraSoft framework. It was primarily developed to amplify the Creatio Classic UIs, but this still works and we can use a lot of useful items here. And if we want to check what is available under our day 5 links, we see here a link to some global methods of TerraSoft framework. And what we do here, the method is show information, for example, and we can search for this method. A global method, and there it is. And we can see how to put this up. We will see this specific one in action. So we will see some pop-up. My button was pressed. Variable price. And this is an example to read using page attributes. So how this is put together? We have our request, and the request will have context. We'll see more context during debugging process later on. But with the context, we can, among other things, address page attributes that are dynamically processing data, connecting our model with our view. And it is built upon a promise, so we always need to use await. If we skip this, we will see some very technical intermediate processing data. So there is a promise to obtain the proper context with the value from page data source. But this was built in a different environment. And we've talked about how this suffix is auto-generated because the only value here is to ensure that every page attribute is 100% unique, not to confuse data sources if we have multiple page data sources. So obviously this is not correct one for this instance of Creatio. Now I've generated something different. And in your environments, it will also be something different. And this is usually how you maintain your code in Creatio. You don't write it by line. You find some examples on Creatio Academy and other projects, and you will need to remember that um, even if you're building a demo, maybe, and if you're not properly binding everything, you're recreating some items, reintroducing some columns with the drag and drop operation, Creatio will always generate a unique suffix. So this will not work for me. Instead, I need to open my view model and find price. And this is the actual name of my page attribute that works with price. Back to handler. So this will allow me to read user price. Then we will also write into console just to make sure that we can properly read price. We will write that price into console. Then we will write into comment. So again, we're using the context of our request. We will again employ the page attribute that is processing comment, and we will write into comment from JavaScript code. So same as with price, this is incorrect. Comment, I think, oh yeah, there is our comment. And finally, we will check if there is we will return next handler if there is one, so that we can run that one. We'll save this change, refresh our testing browser tab, open a yacht record, console, hmm. Okay, so security policy is, as you can see, I'm using Edge. Actually, it operates very, very well. We do have some Edge unique security policies. I see some widgets, so probably some deprecated items that are no longer necessary, but are still in requests. So we will see. Well, again, this is a very complex multi-layer application. There are some new errors that are unique to 832. They come from, I think this one would come from widget, but it also could be that some services are unavailable because I'm running a local instance. So we can dive deeper into that. But yeah, essentially, as long as our page works, we should expect some errors. But if behavior is as we expect it to work, then we're fine. Okay, so enough of that. Let's hit test. And here we see my button was pressed, but our console is button works, price 27,000. So our button works exactly as expected. Sorry, comment also now we have written into comment from GS Code. So I will ask you to recreate this, though in home assignment that there's going to be some differences into what is expected from you. And back to let me reopen our training plan for today. The next item is some business rules for pages and objects. But actually, I'm using this because it is useful and it has some uniqueness, but I'm also embedding there the roles membership, and this is a big part. This is something that becomes kind of a pain, so we will spend a lot of time managing role and discussing when and how this is done in the context of some of the business rules, but this is just an example. So I don't want to interrupt this actually. So if you don't mind, let's push our break a little earlier today. I have 57 minutes. So let's get back to it at 12. Please give me a thumbs up if it's okay with you. Thank you. So see you in 15. Sorry. And the business rules, so business rules are processed by a separate manager, a separate engine in order to apply some extra automated logic to your client side. So it doesn't deploy the application server. The way it is called is by the identification of a specific module that you are using this for. So there are different modes essentially for a business rule. I can open design time for my page. And again, I'm not saying this maybe often enough, but it is a good hygiene when you open design time this way, just to go to page settings, just make sure that I know when I'm saving this, because our structure is pretty simple. We have one application, one package, real life scenario. It's not going to be that straightforward. So now I know when I'm saving, okay, I'm ready to work to move forward. And this item, cogwheel with like indented list in here, is our link to business rules. In the stored separately, we need to first save business rule, but then by publishing our client module, we actually connect them. So what kind of business rules we have available? That depends on the type of business rules. We have business rules that are only applied to a specific page, but we have this, and maybe naming is not that obvious, yacht business rules. In this case, yacht means yacht object. This is the name of the object. And this means that these business rules are going to be applied to all client modules that use yacht as a data source. So something that is unique to page only, because it does require element code, which is unique to every client module, so cannot be applied on object level, is show and hide elements. So let's think of an example. Maybe we should only show comment if drive type is chosen, just as an example. So add action, show element, which element, and we have options here. An input essentially means one page field. Chart, when I will open once again, but I will need to remember to close. So hiding a field, this is what we've seen. Chart, if we are using any kind of widget, that would be hiding a chart. Component of the page, everything that is in list of components would fall there. So if we want to only show progress bar under certain condition, that would be a component. Layout element, the layout element are our collection of containers and toggle panels in tab. So essentially, with a business rule, we could even create a business rule that will hide this flex container called content container. So everything inside will also be hidden and only shown under certain condition, and custom elements. We are going to hide the comment field, so that is an input then. Input here has a little bit of a different context comparing to the input of a page, but more on that later. So hiding comment. No, showing comment. We will make this by default hidden. So we will only show comment if certain conditions are met. So add condition. And here we have two different items. We have page attributes, like the one that we've used in our code example. And we have data source fields, which either are page parameters if we're working with business processes, or those model items that loaded our column object column values. So the difference is, for example, if I go to my page, we will see that I never use created on or created by on this page. And if I go back here, if I select attribute, created on and created by are not available to me. And this should be expected because if I go to source code, because I never use them on the page, I do not have them in my view model where my page attributes are. So I can use captain, but I cannot use created on because created on is not used. And this checkbox here essentially indicates the same. So, but I'm not forced to rely on it because my model still has that information in memory. So I can still use it, but for that, I would need to switch to data source field, and then I can use created on. In our scenario, it doesn't really matter. So attribute works fine because I can still use the data source for the same. And we've agreed to rely on drive type. Only if drive type is populated should we show a comment. Let me close this because it will get in a way. So drive type operator is filled in. If it's filled in, we will show comment. So we'll save this. And it doesn't work in reverse. So you might expect that it will hide comment if it's not filled in. It does not. So I'm going to my comment field and I will make my comment invisible. And I'll save this. Invisible by default. Let's go to our different example. I think that we don't have drive type here. Yeah, and we see comment is absent. And only when I select a drive type, I will see sale. And if you look into this carefully, you will see that there is some delay. It doesn't happen immediately. So let's see here. It's not a performance issue. This is actually hard-coded behavior. The idea was that instead of reacting to all possible events, and you potentially can have many business rules on the page, there is half a second delay that is used to gather all the events and then react to them simultaneously. And the reason for this design, which is a better user oriented approach, is to prevent page from blinking, because our page is super simple, but potentially you will have many more items, many more business rules, and it will be blinking a lot for a user if you will run them um, separately. So instead, we're capturing those events, gathering, sorry, those events. Okay, let's do something else with a business rule. What else we can do if you didn't have the option possibility to check? So we can make um, read-only items editable, or we can make elements read-only. And this doesn't necessarily rely on any condition. So for some of the actions with this if-then pair, for some of the actions, condition is not necessary. But this is not your usual if-then structure. You cannot indent ifs one into another. You can only put together some conditions and combine them with either logical and or logical or. There is no other way. And you can also use multiple thens if the conditions are met. So you're not restricted to show elements and then another condition. We can simultaneously show one element, make another element read only, and make another element required, for example. So, and all under the single condition, and this is what can work. Sometimes a workaround to the fact that you cannot indent nest ifs into other ifs is to make multiple business rules. But essentially, what the approach that we take is that if it can be resolved by business rules, we do business rules. And only if it cannot, like if we really need that indentation, only then we use the source code and we will do some validation also with the source code. Our next business rule may be we will we will combine the two. If the length is less than 2 feet, we will clear the comment. So something more complex and maybe more interesting. And we will apply this on the object level, which means that this is going to work for all pages that use yacht. Add rule. So condition, length is smaller than 3 feet. Add condition, length. Here, a great new operator, which is actually very recent. Previously, we only have equals, not equals. Now we have these comparison operators that actually makes the necessity to make any JavaScript code much less frequent. So length is shorter than, and we can rely also on a different attribute, so we can compare the two, comparing crew count to passenger count. So if we have fewer passengers than crew, then maybe we need to somehow react to this. To a system setting, obviously, and to a constant value. Because length is an integer, we rely here on integer. So condition is it's shorter than 3 feet. And action is to set value. So I will use first a different attribute to show the formula. So for example, if I use set value and we will do that, I think later, to a price per day, which is a decimal, we have this option to set up formula. And here we have the collection of what is available in that formula. So again, please understand that here with no code, we again simply built a metadata file that will be processed by an engine that is designed for business rules. So what it means, if I think of this as a, just why do I need this for people who don't know how parentheses works, and you try to use something of your own, for example, like you would try to use modulo, it will not work because the engine doesn't know modulo, or it will not be able to insert it. Also, if you find that business rule in your file system and try to make any modifications there, it will also not work. So if it's a no code, then it's a no code. So if you need such operations, then you will need a handler, and we will create other handlers. So here we can do some simple operations. We have the list of data sources here. We only have one data source, and we usually only have one data source, and we can run some operations here. Oh, we have validations. I think this is new. This is cool. It has, though, some cool features inside, such as conversions when necessary, so they will be applied. This is a very low-code-ish tool, but we have agreed that we will do something else. We want to clear the comment. Comment is a text field. Set values, comment. For the text field, we can only use value from another field, or and that can, by the way, be a related object. So there is actually much more application that you might think. If we have related objects, we can use them to populate that field, or simply a constant value for text. So we could use something like this. And usually this is just simple string, but apparently there is a touch more to that. And maybe it will later be maybe better documented, or maybe more items introduced. So even though I would expect to see the text null here, but just some texting and experimenting showed that this works, and this can be a cool feature. So let's save this. And we also need to save the page to connect them. Refresh our page. I will select some drive type, test comment, 5, OK, 2, and you see comment is cleared, but it is set to 0. So if I return to 5, hopefully this is expected by you. If I return to 5, nothing happens. Test 2, I change 5 feet to 2 feet, and again, comment is clear. So hopefully you will find an application to this null to a text field. But yeah, and let's see them in configuration. Add-in files can be items, sorry, not files, items, because an item in configuration is usually represented with multiple files in file system. We've seen this with business processes. We've seen this with client, but this is the truth for almost all the items. And now we see two business rules. We have a form page business rule. This is not by business rule. This is the category of business rules. So if we have 10 business rules for a same page, they're all represented by single add-on type configuration items. And we have these business rules that are applied to a yacht object. So will work for all pages. And they're also visible on the object level. If I open my yacht object and I go here to business rules, I see the set values to comment text field, but I should not expect the other one that hides a field depending on drive type, because it's relying on element code, as such only available on for a certain page. So back to our yacht form page. And now we will make something more interesting and complex. Business rules. We will build a business rule that will rely on a user role. The idea is this. We want say price per day is a sensitive information. We only want to show them to financial department. Option A would be to the object permissions. And under object permissions, I think, I was building some example for number, so we would do the same for price. But yesterday we discussed how this has two downsides. First, if I do not show data, what user will actually see, user will see the field price per day, but then the value is going to be empty. So this is how we hide by permissions by column. And this is not very user-friendly because it doesn't explicitly say that there is a value, but it is not meant for you. So we should either hide it completely, or maybe we could use encrypted string. If you will be interested and will have time, let me know. We can test encryptions. Also, maybe you can use encrypted string to only show part of it, which is usually true for some like card numbers, security numbers, etc. We're going to do the former. We're going to completely hide the field so user doesn't even know that there is such an information as price per day. And it will only be shown to a certain users who are in role finances. So first we are going to create a role. Back to the settings page, organizational roles. And first super important thing here is it is often misunderstood that organizational roles are meant to represent your organization structure. Organizational roles are used for access rights and licenses and some business processes. That's it. Can you represent your actual organization structure? You can, but it's not very useful. Some organizations are very unflexible to reorganizational, so they remain the same for decades. Usually financial institutions, governments, and such. So for them, this is not a problem. Most of the business entities are more fluid, though, and organization will change. And if you will recreate a very complex tree structure of that organization, and then someone would move a unit from one structure to another, it's going to be a very complex and messy stuff. You can't simply move items from one to another. So maybe what you want to consider instead is, maybe I did this already. Let's head to Studio maybe. Employees. You want to consider employees object. It already pre-configured. You can modify it. And what an employee is obviously your employee record that is connected to a contact always. This is important. And it has some read from contact items, so you don't need to repeat these columns. It's already structured through the inputs to read some items from contact. You only need to add the columns that are unique to your organization. Every employee has a manager, their boss, which can be used in business processes, and employees are connected to organizational units. You can create parent organizational units to your organizational units. So you can build your structure there because usually most of the people more or less share. Sorry, this is test environment. I will just run it in case we will need it. So usually in most of your projects, the access rights are not that different on the organizational roles. In fact, more than half access rights are actually managed not by object permissions, but rather through business rules because they're much more flexible and dynamic. So you include some change of access rights into the life cycle of your entities. But back to organizational roles. We still need them for items like business processes, for a business rules that I'm about to create, for licenses. We can license users directly, but it's just so time consuming. So maybe it's best to use roles. And we still use them for some access rights. Creatio's approach is that if we create a complex organizational role structure, we do not recommend move all of it. Only move the items that are necessary. I will explain what necessary means in a moment. So I'm here to create a new role. It can be either organization or division. There is no difference. The only one is that organization can include both organizations and divisions only consist of divisions. Otherwise, they operate exactly the same, so it doesn't matter. And we will call this finances. And save. As of now, no users are in finances. So role exists. It has a parent role. Every role has a parent role. In this scenario, parent role is the root role, all employees. This is important, but how we will learn later. Back now to our yacht. And to business rules. And we will add a rule that either will hide price for all users who are not in this role, or we will make it hidden by default, like we did with comment, but only show to this role. So we can use reverse logic when necessary. Add condition, and we are using a system variable, current user role. And we see here the operator contains, because this is almost never one-to-one connection, because most of the users are at least in root role, all employees, that includes all users, and then one or more other organizational roles. So let's see this in database, actually. The information about users and roles are stored in two primary database tables, and also there is a third one that is calculated in runtime. So here is our Y3 dev. It's called sysadmin unit. So what we have here is the name, and we, for example, see our supervisor, who is a record in system admin unit. Supervisor is connected to supervisor contact. What else? Supervisor has the type value 4, which means regular system user. He's active and he is logged in. In this exact same table, we also see our finances role. So this is a little bit complex structure. Why it's necessary? It is necessary to enable some flexibilities. So probably now you know that functional roles can include organizational roles and other users. And this is actually very complex. So I have a functional role. If I create a new functional role, I can include organizations like so, and I can also include users. And this flexibility brings in complexity. So this is why we need many data tables in order to organize these items. And we have two more tables to represent this. So sysadmin unit stores both roles and users. And this is the primary data for user. But then we also have user in role. And so we see here an ID of a user and an ID of the role. And these are actually all supervisor. So supervisor is in all employees. I'm not saying that this one exactly is the all employees. Maybe maybe we can compare. So this is supervisor, and what is this? System administrators. All employees. And this is supervisor, I think. Yes. No. No, 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 no. Developers, probably. I this is a functional role, so evidently I saved it. Functional role 1 already exists. Sorry for this. Yeah, but this is why supervisor is in 3 roles now. We can delete this role. We cannot because supervisor is here. Exclude from folder, and now we should be able to delete. Yeah, so sorry, I created some connections through the organizational roles, so it will take some extra steps to correctly delete it, but we will talk about, I think we already discussed the integrity, and we will also talk about some preventions during logging. I'm not going to distract it. Yeah, but essentially we have system user in role. So our supervisor is in role system administrator. They're also in role all employees, and they're also in where in role functional role 1. This is the name that I give it. Another one is from system Unit in, no. Admin unit in role, maybe. System admin unit in role. This is a dynamic data. It is being recalculated during runtime. And this is another one that is necessary to store information about how a organizational role can also contain a big part of functional role, and users that are in that organizational roles are now become in that functional role also, but some other users are directly in functional role. So this is recalculated automatically. You should not try to bind this one. This will not work for you. This can be bound and this can be bound. And I understand that this looks complex and confusing, but this is the price that we pay for the flexibility with organizational and functional roles. Another thing that I do not recommend regarding our roles is to have the manager's role activated, which is unfortunately activated by default. This is a great feature. What it does, it essentially reads if someone is a manager, this will read access rights of all users who that manager manages. Sorry. But the way is used is through actual runtime read of all this data behind all the users who I am managing and who are nested in my division that I am managing. So for small, medium businesses, it's okay, but as Creatio focus is now more on enterprises, for enterprise, this will work poorly in time. As long as early phases, this will work perfectly, but when you will have a lot of users, a lot of roles, a lot of business processes assigning, because this is not relying just on object permissions, but also on business processes, temporary delegations. So this is something that I wouldn't recommend. So two general recommendations: consider employees, consider not using management roles. And now back to our business rule. The business rule, now hopefully you understand why current user role contains. So we have current user. When user logs in, like a backpack, they will carry around number of roles they're in. And system will use that to work with access rights. And in this scenario, client will also react to users that among the selection array of their roles they're in have the following. So question mark, lookup, system administration object, and we will find our finances. So if user is in finances, we will show them add element, input, price. We will save, enable, check title. This is buggy. For maybe I did this accidentally, but it was cleared. Okay. In a different rule. Our rule is totally fine. So let's save this, refresh. Something is not working. I know what's not working. I skipped an internal step. Sorry, got distracted by the comment bug. But yeah, we need to make this invisible by default. Price per day is now invisible by default. And here it is important to understand that business rules, they don't care about my super level of access as a supervisor. As a supervisor, as a system administrator, I have special operations that allow me to read, modify, delete any data in the system, including the system data, not just business data. But from system perspective, what I just did is some client modifications. So there is no workaround. Client changes if I'm in finances role. Being super system administrator, I am not in that role. So it will not show me what I want. So if I include myself to the role just for the test purposes, I go to finances, I add supervisor, who is an existing user, to the organizational role, go back to Yacht. We should have this page cached, so I refreshing just to be on the safe side. And now price is shown to me because of the business rule that shows to people who are in finances. I will keep my supervisor in finances just to see this rule. Another small thing before we go into binding is how usually you would use this. Maybe you will hide fields. Maybe you will hide more complex items. For example, the whole tab can be hidden depending on the role, and that tab can be full of some inputs, and this will work perfectly. Or maybe you use it with a page that is called from a business process, and that page reads data through the business process, shows it to user, and some data is sensitive and only can be shown to selective users. Also works perfectly. Our solution is incomplete. Why not? So we've just said, let's exclude supervisor again from the finances from the finances role, exclude supervisor from finances folder. Okay. No need to refresh. But now I see that it's gone. And the problem is I'm still allowing to adding columns. I think that the editability of lists for most of the users, especially in companies where there are many users, is maybe estimated. But by default, we allow inline editing, inline adding. This new will create a new yacht. Inline editing, where I can change values right here, and also repositioning of columns, and also changing the width of the columns. So these are default settings. If I go to the settings of my list, I will see some options to reflect that. So I have draggable columns, resizable columns, allow sorting, inline adding, and inline editing, which is a higher level in hierarchy. Header by default includes this plus, so I can go here and I can reveal the information that was hidden from me. So essentially, my business rule does nothing if this was meant for data protection rather than for maybe like enhancing users' experience. So they only see information that is relevant to them, but we don't intentionally hide it from them. So that is okay. In this scenario, like in my use case, I actually wanted to hide with business rule, and I can deactivate header, but deactivating header, we will try that later, will hide column names. So what do? I understand this is a problem, and I go to my list settings and I try to figure out what can I do? Hiding header will hide plus sign, but it will also hide column names. Draggable, resizable, maybe I want them still be available. Sorting available to user, so I can in design time sort for user, and they will not be able to resort, which is useful if we limit number of records shown to user. Editing, so nothing here helps. because inline editing stands for this operation, editing data in the row. It's not about editing the column selections. So I will go to Creatio Academy and check the component. This is list component. And I can see into the list components what is available to me. And I can see some features are available here. And header visible is not what I need. Selection of cells, not. Some column features, drag and drop. We see this in no code designer. So if I can do this with no code, I should do this with no code. Uh, Resizing, the same, sorting, adding columns. Now this looks interesting and we will test this now. So back to my list page. There is no such option in the no code. I will go to I will go to source code now. I will close my previous tab before I do anything, not to accidentally override. And I will try to find my data table. Oh, there it is, immediately here. And here on the data table, so there's my columns, and I want to add some features. So, and we can test if order matters. I'll put it in between test and development just to be on the safe side. So features. What is our feature? First columns. And here I need adding. I will set it exactly like it looks in the example. Adding to false. Published, and now I see that the plus is gone. So I can still move columns around as a user. I can still resize, apply sorting, but now I fixed the issue of, oh, sorry, I have this twice. Yeah, now I cannot add or hide, but yeah, I hope that you understand the purpose of all of this. So as I've taken now plus, user cannot add anything um, to the list, columns to the list. They can still modify to some degree, but this way, if I've hidden something on the page level and I don't want them to see it on the list level, it's not available to them. And this is also an example how I can still, not every feature of the component is available in no-code designer. So first you want to, if the component is problem, before trying something super complex and very lengthy, like creating your own component, which requires a lot of expertise, you might want to read the component description, and maybe you will find the fix right there, like we just did. Okay, so another problem. What did I do with my business process as I've added it? In my business process, in here, I am basically stating a foreign key of a role that has to be bound. And which means that if my solution travels to the targeted environment, then this is going to be missing. So this business role cannot work for me. So I need to bind it. And we know that this is called system admin unit, but it is unfortunately a bit more complex because of some protections. So if I go to configuration and try to add data item, add data, object is sys admin unit, bound data, finances, column settings. As I'm binding, I still should take care of this immediately right now, though I know this will not work. I will force update name, and I'm going to save this, close this, and I'll need a moment here to start my PowerShell so that it can run global operations. And I'm going to try to deliver this to test. While it's loading, another thing that is important to understand, and this is why we appreciate that we actually have access to all items in our configuration. I'm not sure what the name is though. Uh, okay, we have here. It's already set to contains rather than okay, system administration object. Unit. Perfect. So the name is system administration object, code is unit, and if we open this, we will see an interesting thing that we need to understand in order how this loads. So, no, sorry. What we really need is maybe user in role, I think. We need to forward user in role. No, we don't need user in role, just the unit. So the problem is that it does have a self-reference. Let me try to find this. Okay, but we've seen this a lot in database so that we don't waste time, but we see how it has self-reference. Oh, there it is. Parent role. Parent role. Yeah, there it is. So I am in the object sysadmin unit, and I have here a lookup parent role, and a parent role is also system admin unit. For our finances, this means that finances are a system admin unit, and they are nested in all. Sorry, I have a technical issue here. We can see this in organizational role structure, actually. So finances are nested into all employees, and both are records in the same table. So this is why we need self-reference. And when we are importing, this is not unique to system administration unit. You might create such object with self-reference on your own. For example, just a small example, if you attended no-code course, like categories and subcategories, two tables, could be one table, where a subcategory has a self-reference to a category that subcategory belongs. So you can create your own business tables with the self-references. And the way this migrates is this. First, let's go to our data files. Mhm. Not a good name, but I was building a bad example intentionally, so I hope you forgive me for that. So first, we are importing everything but the parent role. So we import everything, but this is the other way for parent role, but this value. And only after the record is imported, this is only for self-references. After record is imported, we import the self-reference ID. So what it means for us? It means for us that when we were installing this data file into the, we should be well done already, and we see that an error occurred. And when we were installing this data file into targeted test environment, and this will happen to you, we tried to install a unit with empty parent role first. And there is a special protection. The protection is necessary because of this structure of all employees. The protection is meant to prevent you from trying in any way possible to create somehow a organizational or functional role that doesn't have a root role. And we only have two root roles. One is all employees. Well, one is all employees, and the second one is all external users. If you create a new root role on your own, you will basically break Creatio. So to prevent this, a certain logic was constructed that will not allow you to insert into sysadmin unit any record that has parent role here, inherited role. Sorry for the inconsistency, but this is essentially the same. This is the parent role if it's empty. And this is exactly how you import data with self-references. There is no way around it. So this is why we cannot, and we cannot properly install this. Data. Oh, yeah, we don't have much here, I'm afraid. Yeah, I should do deliveries more frequently, I think. Yeah, we will properly now install in the next go. Okay. So how do we fix this? How this works, maybe first. Here is our Y3 dev, our tables. Sysadmin unit table. And here we have triggers. And here we have a special trigger for sysadmin unit root. So the way this is structured, this is a trigger that will fire if a certain event occurs. And if you try to insert a sysadmin unit where there is no parent, but we are now comparing to the type, then if it's not 4, essentially, then we should roll back. Why is this type 4? This might be a little bit confusing, what this stands for. The type 4 it stands for regular users. And now we have more type of users. But when this trigger was designed, there were only four types. So type 4 is also a record in sysadmin unit, but this is your standard user, like supervisor. And supervisor shouldn't need a parent role because they are user. So then we will not fire this exception because it's 4. If it's maybe this should be reported because this is outdated. And if it's not 4 and parent role is null, then from the design perspective, it means that we are inserting not a regular user, which essentially means potentially means organizational and functional roles without parent ID, without parent role. And this will mean that this insert well, we need to run the rollback. Now, because we have direct access here, we can disable, but you will not usually because you will be working with mostly with cloud environments. So what we need is to run a SQL script, which is also prepared in today's materials. And if you will be testing this on your trial environments, you will obviously need to run this as a PostgreSQL text. I'm using Microsoft SQL, and I'm going to alter the table, specifically disable temporarily this trigger. Now back to my development environment. Yacht, add SQL script. We'll call this disable sys, just maybe admin unit root trigger. Microsoft SQL script installation type will actually matter a lot. We will do, well, we can do this before or after package, but before the data files install. So first we install the schemas data, then before or after that we can run this script to disable that trigger so that before we process or loader processes the data file, it's already disabled. We use it just before, apply, copy paste. And before we use this in our delivery, we can actually test this in this development environment by simply installing it. So instead of using the server manager, I'm installing the SQL script in this develop environment of mine. And if I navigate back, it's very hard to see, but oh, sorry. You see this red cross, which means that this is an indication that this trigger is disabled. So this works. Perfect. And now we will do the same only to enable it back. So add SQL script, naming enable admin unit root, enable admin unit root, root trigger. And this is going to be after schema data. So first script to disable, then data file, all data files, and then this script that disables. Apply. And it's the same, just the word enable instead of disable trigger. I will also want to test this first. I'll refresh, and I will now see that red cross, sorry, is gone. So it's back on and should fire when next time someone is starting to do anything. Oh, sorry. Now let's try this again. We will download from Yacht 3 Dev. Install to Yacht 4. It will take a while. So this is not just related to business rules. I hope you understand this. This is every time that you are actually using the role ID. So you don't have to bind all of your roles, but at the moment when you use a specific role, you need to do this. So for example, you are building a business process. And in this business process, you might be using some approval. And in that approval, you will be okay if it's an employee. Employee are very simple to bind, but rather than employees, managers, which I think is overlooked, it's so easy to put together if you're employing employees entity, but it's still usually a role. And so now I will be using a specific role and I send finances. So what I mean here is a certain key of a finances should be applied. So at this point in time, the proper way would be to, okay, now I need this role, to put a save to it. And it says, well, you're not done here. Yes, I know. I will navigate back to you later. Go to configuration, create 3 data. Oh, I think that now my loader can potentially skip this file, but I will explain later. So go to configuration, create this 3 items, one for the data itself, one to disable and other one to enable trigger. And then back to process, because now you know your role is bound and you can safely continue working and it will be safely delivered. Otherwise, you will have to recreate a lot of stuff on your test environment, on your dev environment, and this is usually a bad way, not a recommended way to do this. Application installed successfully. Let's refresh our application. I have a concern. I will explain this, but we will test first anyway. Okay, Yacht. Let's create a new Yacht in our test environment. And yeah, business rule works. So we do not see. Now I will go on my test environments to organizational roles, and I will, this is browser playing with me, caching. So you've seen for a moment supervisor was there, but this came from confusion from previous. So yeah, I see supervisor is seeing it, not seeing, yeah, because we've changed this. Uh, Organizational roles, finances, supervisor adding existing into my dev environment. On dev environment, I see price per day. On my test environment, I'm not yet here. New, price per day absent. And I'm going to add organizational roles. finances, add existing, supervisor, back to creating a new yacht, and price per day now exists. So this works perfectly. Also, all changes arrived, and now in our test environments, we can actually see what I was meaning to have. Like I am unable to even see this price on my list page, so everything works perfectly. And this is very important and very, very frequently overlooked. And you will run into this sooner or later. You will, and hopefully you will remember that we've discussed this issue, and you will be able to properly bind your role and recreate everything. Now, the last item for today is very, very, very short. We're not going to spend too much time there, and that is inputs. So role transfer with data item. Hopefully you understand. Oh, sorry, I was meaning to address a concern that I had. I was afraid because there is unfortunately some inconsistency, but I was afraid that because my loader already tried to process the data file, um, I was concerned that because of that, it will ignore this because it is by the modification time that loader knows, well, I've already loaded this item. If it's different, then it will load it. If its modification time is the same that I have in my destination, it's not going to be processed. With data files, more frequent than not, they are still processed no matter the modification time, modified on time. I think that was done to avoid mistakes like I just did, because maybe data is causing more frequent mistakes. But I wasn't able to create easily recreatable and consistent behavior when it does and when it does not. But yeah, we've seen that it's processed and it successfully arrived as it should. So inputs. Input is a different type of field on the page, which is designed in order to look into some data that's stored somewhere else. So, and we will be only reading such data. If and that should be an edge case, I have one single page that will be processing multiple data tables, meaning that, for example, this field and this field represent columns of different data tables, and I can simultaneously write into those data tables. So I will be updating this column in data table A, and I will be updating this column in data table B by simply clicking Save button just once. This is only useful and necessary, again, usually financial institutions, where people are working with very complex records of account holders. There is just so much information that can be related to many entities, and you don't want them to. So there are two approaches then. You either create business processes where they click a button, a pop-up, they put together some smaller piece of information related to that entity, hit OK, and that goes to table A. And then they work with other information in the runtime, which is table B. They hit save and they save it to table B. Alternatively, you add multiple data sources. And input is what is usually used because it is very often you need information from someone else to be displayed. For example, I have my captain and I want to know their age, or maybe not age, their email address. And for that, I am using an input, which means that Creatio will run a query to respective databases, still instantiate contact object, so Creatio will respect access rights, extract email, and show it on this page, but not for modification, just as an extra piece of information. So I can drag and drop it here, and my data source then will be not my yacht, because Yachts doesn't have any text fields with the proper email format, but will instead rely on related object. And I will see all related object, but I only need the one that creates a reference to a contact. So I'm using Captain Lookup, and then I'm able to select an email, and I need to give it the proper code, Captain email for the element code, and for the title also. Wow, I did not expect this. Most unfortunate, but evidently, let's give it a test. Interestingly enough, I think because of the unique structure, but seems like I cannot modify the title of this element after I simply select a data source. Yeah. So this is something to remember. Not very convenient, but understandable. So title on page is going to be it only wants to add. I should still modify title on page. I think this is because of the hard-coded connection. So yeah, probably because of the hard-coded connection. Why it wouldn't allow me to do title? I can still use localizable string and use this for English US, but fortunately we have this masking property, which is actually a property to any field. A property to any field. And here I can say, well, okay, the title of this, the code of this element is Captain Email. The code of the data source, well, this is expected, is locked for modification. The title is unexpectedly also locked, even though interface doesn't show this. But thankfully, I have another property, which is title on page. So we'll call this Captain Email to replace. Let's refresh. Captain Supervisor. And we did not make them clickable, so we will have to go to Contact 360. And let's add an email address. Whoa, whoa, whoa. I wonder. Is it because, let's test this properly, then Captain Supervisor. So we see that the Captain email is empty, where actually Supervisor has some dummy data. This is not an actual data. Maybe this is the, but Supervisor, my company. Okay, let's add communication option and add a proper email. It could be the problem of demo data, but it could be something that requires reporting. Back to our yachts. So this is an off-top. Contact has a one-to-many relation to emails. And I think the demo data, even though stating that that was a primary email, wasn't inserted properly. So this is why we haven't seen this. But now that I've manually inputted, we see a proper email. So this is not a bug of the input. But this way I can actually see information from different places using read. We have some other modes here, including the encrypted. But what we can't, yeah, in blob will be now also available for image, so which is also great. Okay, then, so this is the end for one more thing though. Let's go to our assignment for today, because we did miss something from yesterday. Just a moment. Okay, so this is going to be your today's assignment. So first, please create a button that will write comment to console. So make sure to follow these instructions. It's a little bit different from what I did, but using my example, you should be able to use this. So again, this snippet will not complete your assignment. It will require some very small modifications. Keep in mind how you read and how you read and how you write. Keep in mind the proper attribute names, usage of proper attribute names, and use this in order to create a button that will write a comment to console. So record has a comment, it should be written to console and show some pop-up with some text and write 500 into price. So this is still a dummy button, but it should run such operations. Then another assignment, I will not ask you to create a specific business rules. I will just ask you to play with business rules if you haven't already. I know that this is a no-code tool, so maybe you've already experienced it enough, and this is optional assignment. If you haven't, make sure to play around with business rules. Maybe you didn't try a user enroll rule, which is comparatively new, but was expected for a very, very long time. Try some formulas, maybe. We will do formula on Monday with no code and then with code, and just get a feeling of business rules. And then completely optional, but try to bind a new role. Try to bind a new role. So what you need to do is simply you won't be able to check if the trigger is enabled or disabled, but you can write those scripts and maybe use a different trial environment to move that, just a single rule, not necessarily to create a trial environment to move all solution, just maybe a new trial environment, and you can try to install just a single role application. So, but this is again optional. What is mandatory is a button. So that's it for